Good morning, everyone. We are live, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Claremont's latest in our webinar series focusing on innovative practice in behavioural change and sharing some of our recent work. I'm going to quickly introduce our speakers here today. We've got an international set of speakers. We've got people joining us from Lisbon and from Dublin and from Milton Keynes and from all over the world. So it's my pleasure to introduce them. We've got Claire from the Canal River Trust. Wave hello, Claire. Hello. We've got Ruth Mayer from National Police Chiefs Council's Project Apex team. Hi, Ruth. Behavioural psychology expert Porrig Walsh from Dublin. Hi, Porrig. And from Claremont itself, we've got our founder, Ben Caspers from Lisbon. Hello. And Emily's in our office in London. Hiya. And I'm Tim, by the way. I'm a director here at Claremont. I should probably introduce myself. Okay, our speakers can run away off camera, and I'll just introduce a bit of what today's about. We'll bring them back in a minute. And also really fantastic attendance today. Thanks everyone for coming along. Do use the chat function to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. But we've got representatives from a number of different police forces from around the country, fire and rescue. We've got DFT here, National Highway Safety Charities, local authorities, and many more besides. So thanks so much. It's really great attendance and great support for this event and the work that we're sharing. And you're all in the right place, because today we're looking at safety campaigns and different sorts of safety interventions. So we've probably all been the target of these campaigns at some point in our lives. The Green Cross Code, if you're as old as me, and Clunk Click, Every Trip, Stranger Danger, Think Bike more recently, and See It, Say It's Sorted. I'm sure some of these will conjure up imagery for you. I'm going to turn my alarms off in a minute, but I'll work out how to do that in a sec. If you're hearing the different bongs from my machine, I'm sorry about that. So we've seen from those sorts of campaigns that traditionally shock and shame have been quite high on the agenda. And while they might be memorable, are they actually effective in influencing behaviours? And I think the jury's probably out on that, although some people are much clearer that those days, the days of those sorts of campaigns are already over. But regardless, from this doubt has grown new approaches to campaigns and safety, and Claremont has been exploring some of this thinking in our recent approaches, including in violence reduction, in antisocial behaviour, drink driving, motorcycle, gas, electrical and water safety. So we're going to reflect on some of these approaches today, but in particular we're going to showcase two projects that lead with the idea that we should stop saying stop. Because if you're a parent of teenage boys like I am, you might agree that simply shouting stop is unlikely to work, however tempting that might be. And I've found that distracting them with shiny things, suggesting alternatives, removing their temptation gets much better results. So what can we all learn from my teenage sons? Not very much, probably. So it's a good job we have some proper experts here instead. And we're going to get going straight away with our first section. So if I can ask Ruth and Ben to rejoin us on camera, please. Sorry about all the bonging. Can you hear all the bonging, Ben? It's I'll try and sort it out. Yeah, I know you can. Sorry. Safety on the roads is an obvious place to start, and Claremont has been working in this space for a number of years now, including supporting Sussex and Surrey Police with addressing drink driving and partnering with UK Road to develop its new national rider risk awareness course. And we've partnered with other police forces in spaces away from road safety as well, including in the Thames Valley, where we developed a campaign addressing cocaine use, and also more recently on violence reduction for young people, which has just recently concluded. And we're right now really delighted to be working with Crime Stoppers with some of its impact work, which Ben is leading actually. But we're going to stick with motorcycles. And sadly, every week, 6 riders lose their lives and 111 suffer serious and life-changing injuries. And while they make up less than 1% of road traffic, they represent over 20% of deaths and serious injuries. So what could a behaviour change campaign look like to try and address those numbers? So we are really pleased to be joined by Ruth Mayer. Hi, Ruth. And Ruth is the National Police Chiefs Council's Motorcycle Portfolio Officer. Ruth has nearly 20 years on the force, I think that's right, Ruth, and as well as being selected by MPCC to support its work on motorcycle safety. Ruth's also a rider herself since the age of 15, currently on a 650 Kawasaki Versys, Ruth.
Yep,
yeah, she's nodding. She's happy with that. And Ruth is joined by our founder, Claremont's founder, Ben Caspers, and Ben has led our work with Ruth and with me and the NPCC team. I should say, actually, just before we hand over to Ruth, we're really keen to hear your questions for all of our speakers, and you can use the Q&A function at the top of your Teams page, and we've got special operatives behind the scenes who will be helping me to field those questions. We'll get as many of those answered as we possibly can. But now I'm going to sort out all this bonging. Apologies for that. I'm going to hand over to Ruth, and Ruth, you can give us a bit of context for this work. Over to you.
Thanks, Tim. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, Ruth Mayer from Northamptonshire Police, currently working with the NPCC. So the Project Apex motorcycle project was thought about by the National Highways and Department for Transport, working together with the NPCC to reduce the amount of killed and seriously injured motorcyclists on the UK roads. Unfortunately, the killed and seriously injured data showed us that there's a plateau of disproportionate numbers of motorcyclists killed and seriously injured, and those figures highlighted certain high-risk groups such as sports bike riders, tourer-style riders and young riders between the ages of 16 and 19 years old on lower powered machines. As a result of this, £3 million was made available from National Highways to pilot new ideas around roads policing to move away from the current enforcement methods and focus more on educating road users, both motorcyclists and car drivers, to avoid collisions from factors such as rider behaviour, roadworthiness of machines and importance of wearing proper protective clothing. We had a bit of a huddle in the initial stages. It's been running since early 2022. We've run 4 pilot themes. Those include communications, which identifying a better way to establish more effective ways of communicating between the police and the public, and also across police force areas. We have a theme on rider behaviour, which is to educate road users to the vulnerabilities of riding motorcycles, and from that we have procured a simulator. We have young riders courses for our young rider high category, where the 16 to 19-year-olds can access sort of a bridge gap training between CBT and their full licence. We have a best operating model, which is where the police forces collaborate together and use resources collectively to establish where there are high numbers of motorcyclists around the bank holiday weekends. And then we have the gig economy, which is at the moment London-based food delivery industry to try and improve safety, education and training. Ben, over to you.
Thanks, Ruth. Just going to share my screen now. Hopefully that's all right. Okay. Can you see that okay, Ruth?
Yes.
Ben, you're in the presenter mode. You need to flip your screens around.
That better?
There you go.
There we go. Thank you very much. Thanks, Ruth. This was a pilot project. It was developed very, very fast. We were first commissioned start of January in this year, and it went live towards the end of March, early April, in time for the bank holiday. You can see the process here. It started with a round of discovery, which I'm going to work through, I'll talk you through now, into some design and creative development, and then into learning from piloting in the field. But I just want to manage expectations. It is a pilot project. It's not fully a through the line, multi-million pound campaign, but we hope that it's got the potential to turn into something like that. The target audience, as Ruth said, the starting point was leisure riders. This is a group that has been quite overlooked up to now. Leisure riders are responsible for a disproportionate amount of the injuries and deaths on our roads. Within the leisure rider group, there are 2 segments identified by National Highways. One are the tourers, and the others are the superbike riders. The superbike riders have been up to now particularly less reached, seldom reached. They are harder to engage. They tend to be more kind of lone wolf. They don't get involved so much in the clubs. And they also ride these particularly powerful bikes. A lot of the riders you can see at the bottom right there are, fairly, they're not young. There are people in their 40s or even 50s and even early 60s. And a lot of the time they are picking up superbikes after periods of not riding. And, they have a very particular approach to their riding, a very particular approach to their kind of risk threshold. They are more up for enjoying the risk side of things. So this program was skewed towards superbike riders, and it had to be ready critically for the bank holiday, which is the start of the riding season. There were 3 bank holidays, one at the start of April, and a few weeks after that we needed to be ready for. This is a summary of the discovery process. You can see on the screen some of the focus group participants, but there was quite a lot more than that. You can see in the bulleted stuff at the top. We did an awful lot of work with experts and academics. We had very generous input from people in the voluntary sector, like Doc Bike, for example, down in the southwest, who's very, very expert at targeting this group, as well as a whole bunch of academics from various universities who generously gave up their time to brief us on the work that they were doing in other places, such as with UK Roads rider intervention courses, which had used some very novel techniques about trying to achieve empathy and trying to achieve simulations for superbike riders and for motorbike riders. We did a lot of desk research looking at the academic literature. We looked at all of the other motorbike campaigns that had happened in the UK and overseas, particularly drawing from some very exciting work done in New Zealand and in Scotland, who'd really been at the forefront of this kind of work. We developed from there some territories, some sort of lines of attack, some directions of travel, and we roughly articulated those so that we could put them into feedback sessions and testing with representatives of our rider groups. Here you can see some of the creative approaches that we tested with these groups, which at this point the idea was to get a wide range of approaches. You can see them numbered 1 to 5 down at the bottom. Over on the left, you've got that typographical, very, very bold approach. And over on the right, you can see it goes all the way through to very much sort of leisure, kind of commercial approach of the lifestyle of riding, and a few different increments in between. This was used as stimulus alongside messaging stimulus for the discovery process, and we got a great deal out of that. I'm just going to cut to the chase and give you the pillars of the approach that we ended up going with. I could easily give an hour just on this one slide, but fortunately for everyone, I won't do that. Top left is probably the most important point. This audience, the superbike riders, don't want to talk about safety, and they don't want to talk about crashes. We needed to smuggle in the safety aspect of this work. We couldn't be overt about that. It would turn them off. And we had to really earn the interest of this audience group. We didn't take that for granted. They weren't going to necessarily listen to us if we came at this the wrong way. The central top one, being a better rider, is catnip. What we meant by that is that these riders are attracted to and run towards content that helps them to be a more skilled rider. The ride craft of what they're doing, the technical aspect, the performance aspect of their riding was critically important to getting their attention. This is a group of riders who would spend hours quite often trawling YouTube, following influencers, learning about how to corner, how to accelerate, how to brake effectively, and how to be a more skilled rider on the road. That mattered to them, and that was a very important point of resonance that we wanted to work with in this campaign. There's a big peer aspect to superbike riders. More often than not, ride as a group or certainly in pairs, and peer respect between riders was also very important. Being seen to be a skilled rider amongst your fellow riders was very, very important. We also found some interesting things about on a tribal level, of certain riders who were kind of the pack leaders, who were the real, the highly respected riders in the group. And we wanted to work with that as well. There were particular behaviours that were leading to crashes more than others, rider behaviours, and that's in the bottom left. Seeing and being seen was a pivotal thing to bringing down those KSIs. And specifically, pulling out at junctions from other road users, mainly from cars, was what was causing a particularly a large cluster of the KSIs. So our campaign had to address that the collisions from the side, from seeing and being seen, more than other road behaviours if we were going to make the most difference. Finally, on the bottom right, like many of the campaigns that Claremont works in, an empowerment-based approach was critical to actually making to influencing behaviour rather than a finger-wagging or judgmental approach. This is the structure of the campaign. I won't dwell on this too much, but you can see that we needed to hook attention with something eye-catching initially. We couldn't take their attention for granted. We needed to bring them in to a deeper level of engagement. Once we'd hooked them, we created a website with some deeper content to achieve that. We knew that in the long term, we needed to have an onward journey where we could collect data and send people off on a sustained engagement with this campaign. Although in this pilot, we had to be realistic. We couldn't necessarily do that in the first instance. That's why we've kind of grayed it out there. We skipped that in the pilot phase just for a matter of resources. And instead, we took a channeling, signposting approach for the onward journey, where we sent them through to other people's assets in the motorbiking scene. And I'll explain that more in just a moment. Our hook we identified was something which we called SMIDSy. This stood for, sorry, mate, I didn't see you. This was a term that we discovered was in common parlance amongst many riders to explain that thing that happened when a car driver pulled out and a collision occurred. Sorry, mate, I didn't see you was a turn of phrase that evoked a very strong reaction amongst the people that we did the pre-testing with. They rolled their eyes at it and were pretty appalled. Oh, sorry, mate, I didn't bloody see you. It really got tongues wagging, and it created, it really got attention. So we used that very much in our campaign, those particular words of SMIDSy and sorry, mate, I didn't see you. Ridecraft was what we called this campaign, and this really drew on that mastery thing that we discovered that the riders were really into. They really wanted to be expert riders and respected amongst their peers. So the name Ridecraft is what we went with. Finally, on the visual side of things, this particular approach that you can see on here, the point of view approach, was head and shoulders above all of the other visual treatments. It was something that the riders really related to and really ran towards. So this is the campaign creative that we went with. The Ridecraft Hub, we called it. You can see the bold typographical approach. You can see this kind of helmet visor effect that we've had, and you can see the photography from the point of view coming through. We really went with the use of expert tips, where people could discover and get advice and experiences from other expert riders who were really, put on a pedestal by the people that we were going after. You can see the QR codes that would help people link through to get those expert tips immediately onto their phones. There was the obligatory graphical design toolkit. This shows the visor arc effect that really helped bring this to life. We've created a collection of photography. We commissioned a specialist rider photographer to go out onto the roads and build us an amazing library of the different road conditions and the different scenarios that riders would encounter on the road. And we made this available to the 13 police forces that piloted this campaign so that they could tailor up their ridecraft assets in a way that was quite fitting to their particular geography. You can see here the targeting device. I forget the name now exactly what we called it, but this logo would move around and could be used to point out hazards within the photographs. You can see there the icon. It's called a reticle. I remember now. This is Tim's favourite word. Produced a bunch of social media adverts. These were very small clips optimised for Facebook and Instagram in particular. There were 3 here. I'll show you one of them now, if it will hopefully play, for the Sorry Mate I Didn't See You Smidsy advert. There was a Ridecraft Hub website, a very simple, low-cost, single-page website, but we managed to populate that website with some amazing content that we got through partnerships with a number of other organisations. We had 3 amazing videos showing some of the Ridecraft tips. These are 2 of them. The one on the left came from the charity in the Southwest, Dock Bike. It was about Smidsy prevention. The one on the right came from from National Highways, was to do with cornering. It came from a partnership with Bauer Media and Motorcycle News. And the third one was from an amazing police officer in Thames Valley Police who had done a piece of video where he commented as he expertly navigated the roads of Buckinghamshire. Here's the content of the toolkit that we produced, all of the usual things about key messages and guidance and some of the data that we used. It also had some advice there on how to promote the campaign to third parties to gain support for it. Here on the next page is the template press release that was used and farmed out for tailoring for the police forces that ran the pilot on the bank holiday. And moving through to some of the media coverage that generated on the bank holiday, we got some good support from local media. You can see some stuff here from Sussex. You can see some use of some of our photography. I must say that not everywhere used it in quite the way that we'd intended it, such as PR. Some really just used parts of it, but we got the coverage that we were after. The social media response was generally very, very positive. You can see a very supportive quote here from a member of the public about Sussex Police being a biker-friendly force. This, for us, was a very good signal that the riders felt that this was resonating with them. Here you can see Sussex Police using some of the social media assets. We also produced on the right here some Z cards that were given out to riders on the roadside by officers, which had QR codes going through to tips. And these were evaluated very well. We had 112 officers fill in our feedback forms, and they really liked the assets. The Ridecraft Hub itself, the website, got 2,500 unique views over that bank holiday period, which exceeded our expectations. People stuck around and consumed the videos, and we were very pleased with the level of engagement. Finally, from here, next steps are in-depth evaluation, feedback sessions with groups of riders, and hopefully, all things going well, a phase 2 to the pilot, where we can go further with our evaluation and we can use control groups and go further to work out whether this is really having an impact. But we were very pleased. It was a really good start. That there is the Ridecraft Hub case study. Over to you, Tim.
Thanks so much, Ben. Thanks to you, Ruth, as well, for taking us through that. I've collaborated with Ben on this project. It's been really fascinating and rewarding to work on it, and I had a real kind of Bader Meinhof effect with SMIDSI since we first started talking about that. I've seen someone, Dick Vincent, in the chat talking about how SMIDSI refers to more than just motorcyclists, and when I go out on a bicycle with my sons, I'm just much more aware of that junction dynamic than I ever was before we started on this project, and how much that really kind of resounded with people in our focus groups as you went through. It was very powerful. Thanks again, Ben and Ruth. We'll come back to you later for questions in the Q&A, and please do use the Q&A function and get your questions answered. We'll come back to those before the end of the session. We're going to move on to our second spotlight now. So if I can ask Claire and Emily to come on camera, there they are. And we're going to talk about water safety now, and inland waterways are the most common locations for accidental drownings, with around 60% of total incidents, and young people index incredibly highly amongst those incidents. So how can we encourage safer behaviours amongst those young people? So we've been really excited at Claremont to pilot some new behavioural change and some nice co-creation approaches, which Emily will talk about, all focused on water safety for the Canal River Trust. So I'm very pleased to be able to introduce our two speakers here. We're delighted to be joined by the Trust Public Safety Campaigns Manager, Claire Gauci. Hi, Claire. And Claire's worked at the charity for over 12 years now in awareness and safety campaign roles. And for the past 18 months or so, Claire, you've been focused very specifically on water safety campaigning at the Trust. Really lovely to have you with us. Thank you. And joining Claire is Claremont's senior consultant, Emily Rayner. Hi, Emily. And she's worked with Claire and with me. I've worked on both these campaigns, and Emily's led the Claremont team on our side. It's been a privilege to do that, but we're going to hand over to you, Claire, in the first instance for a bit of an intro to this world.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much for that excellent presentation before. So much to learn from that as well. Hello, everyone. As Tim said, I'm Claire Gauci from Canal River Trust. I'm really delighted to be able to join you all today to talk about the project that we've been working on. I'm going to be giving you an introduction, and then Emily's doing all the hard work. She's doing points 2 to 5. So we'll just go through to point number 1. Canal River Trust is the charity which looks after 2,000 miles of waterways in England and Wales. This includes 72 reservoirs, 1,500 locks, nearly 3,000 bridges, 700 miles of our canals have been awarded green flag status. It's all based around water. So water safety is incredibly important for the work that we do. We do already run water safety campaigns, looking at parents and carers of children under 5. We look at primary school education, and we support other campaigns run by excellent organisations like the RLNI and their Float to Live campaign, and the Royal Lifesaving Society's Don't Drink and Drown campaign. We're also part of the National Water Safety Forum. We support the work that they do and all the other members in it. But this is not what we're talking about today. We are talking about the problem that we were facing, very sadly, with teenagers getting into the water in the summer. This is not a photo that we took. It's a photo that's available on Google, but it perfectly shows the situation that we're facing. It's normally the summer months. It could be after exams, hanging out with friends, having a good time, wanting to make some memories. Tragically, we could get up to about 5 or 6 deaths of teenagers every year, normally in the summer months, and we need to do something about this. This young lad here jumping into the lock, he could land on an item that shouldn't be in the canal, like a shopping trolley. He could get tangled, his legs could get tangled in reeds and vegetation, The water could be much shallower than you think or much deeper than you think. The water could be incredibly cold. There are lots of risks of why jumping in is not the best place. It's not a swimming pool. It's a working lock which boats go through, and it's not designed for people to swim in. So how do we face this problem? We did some work on this before. We hadn't worked with Claremont, and I thought it was going to go really well, and it worked great for the parents who saw the films on our social media channels. There were much more shock films, and they didn't do great with the audience that we needed. So we needed to think outside the box and think about how we were actually going to reach this audience. And that's when we came to Claremont, because we knew that they would have the goods. So some of the parameters of our work with Claremont, we needed to, obviously our waterways are all inland. The recent figures from WADE, which is the water incident database organised by the National Water Safety Forum, says that 63% of accidental drownings that happened last year were at inland waters. The summer months are very difficult for drowning. In 2022, back when it was sunny in the summer, a tragic 46% of those accidental drownings happened in those 3 months. So we really need to think about that. Young males in particular, across all ages, but we wanted to specifically look at young males. And our waterways cover all regions across England and Wales, and they're all different, and there are different issues, different types of water. So we needed an approach that could be tailored to fit each region. And that's where I will hand over to Emily.
Thanks, Claire. So this was our challenge to reduce the number of deaths caused by drownings and water-related injuries. But I think it's important to say as well that we're part of a chain of events that are all kind of working towards this goal. So as Claire has mentioned, there's other campaigning activity that the organisation are doing, and other organisations also working in this space. We were doing this in a very targeted pilot region in Wigan, really wanting to sort of test out whether our approach to doing a campaign in this way was going to work. And so really just experimenting at this stage. And our research methodology, is you'll see in some of the other projects that we deliver as well, looks a lot like this. So lots of background research provided by Canal River Trust and other organisations such as the National Water Safety Forum. My colleague Mel did a lot of work looking at behavioural psychology, really reviewing that academic literature so we could better understand young people's mindsets and the things that are important to them at that stage in life. And then we did some interviews with both external stakeholders and those working at Canal River Trust. And really crucially, once we'd had all of that kind of initial research, we took that to the young people to sort of verify and sense check and get their own ideas about what it's like on the ground and what ideas they might come up with for particular solutions. So like Ben, there's a whole other presentation that goes into these insights in a lot more detail, but I just wanted to give you a flavour here of some of the things that the professionals, the adults, were saying about the young people. So their perception from what they were seeing was it was big groups, girls and boys, but it was the boys taking the risk, and they actually talked about often they thought that it was the girls who were egging them on and persuading them to do more risk-taking behaviour. It was sort of seen as a cheap day out, somewhere to have fun, like going to the theme park or going to the beach. Everybody sort of turning up in their swimwear with their towels and really looking to have a good, fun day out. No one was looking to get into trouble. No one was looking to have any harm happen to them. It was really more about gathering with friends and having a good time. The professionals we spoke to talked a lot about young people jumping off something, into something, over something. I just seemed to want to jump. Sorry, the light's turning off in my room. Hang on a sec. There was a real sense of like they really couldn't believe that actually more accidents weren't happening because the risks that they saw young people taking were very, very extreme. And here's just a snapshot of the insights from behavioural psychology. So we understood from our reading that teenagers are at a stage in their life where they're exploring their limits, they're looking for thrills, they've got this real desire to have new experiences. And because of this attunement to oxytocin, which is a neural hormone, which among other things makes social connections more rewarding, they are gravitating more towards their peers and looking to their peers to kind of verify their activities and have that real kind of worry about peer rejection and really wanting to impress one another and outdo one another, because that's the world that they're entering in as they become adults. So this is just a summary of the insights that we got from that desk research and also talking to professionals working in this space. So boys taking the lead, but girls very much there on the scene as well. This sense of it being their beach, that they're making memories together, as Claire mentioned, often coming out of exams, a real release, a real opportunity for independence, and trying things for the first time. But the friendship dynamics, the way that the professionals perceived this was that they encouraged each other to take risks, to get into danger, all for that kind of desire to impress one another and the sort of one-upmanship of doing something more dangerous than the person before them. And then this insight at the end here is just kind of a bit of an outlier, because we had quite a lot of conversations about the fact that this is, for some communities, it's just what's always been done. And so we were very clear straight away that this wasn't going to be something that we would speak to parents about, because actually parents often would be the ones who were encouraging the young people to do it. So they would actually drive them to the canal to go and have a good time. They would say that they did it, that's where they learnt to swim, that's where granddad learnt to swim. It was very much part of their community and part of their culture. And so that, you know, having parents as the messengers really wasn't the approach that we were going to take with this. So we took a strategy which is very much focused on a peer-to-peer approach. We really wanted to see whether we could flip the idea of young people encouraging each other to take risks, to actually see if we could have friends who discouraged one another from taking too much risk. So we developed this kind of social cycle in the way that we saw it, which essentially kind of starts here with young people needing to congregate. That's really important to them. And then they as a group define sort of what the social behaviour is, what's the desirable thing that they want to do that day. And that kind of decision making, that sort of what the social status ought to be, is what's driving the extremity of that behaviour. Young people then take the risks, and if the risks are too high, there's obviously a chance that that could lead, unfortunately, to deaths. And the reason why this is circular is because what we also found from our conversations is that despite some really terrible, tragic instances happening in certain bodies of water, young people still continued to go back to those places, to behave in those ways, to congregate as young people had done before them. And so for us, it was never going to be about kind of, you know, saying, well, this is what's happened, so don't do it anymore. It's actually about, okay, if you're going to congregate, if you're going to come together, how do we intervene here in defining what the desirable behaviour ought to be? What's the limit? How do we make sure that it's not so extreme that someone gets hurt, or unfortunately, in some cases, someone dies? So this was all quite hypothetical at this stage. It's really important that we took this into a co-design process. I think, as I mentioned, that we wanted to do the pilot in Wigan, so it was really important for us to go there. And we worked with Wigan Youth Zone, who brought together a group of young people for us who had either been into the canals themselves or had friends or brothers or sisters who had taken part in those types of activities. And we got a mix of boys and girls, and we met with them on 2 occasions to do this co-design activity. So initially we found something that felt quite similar to what the adults were telling us, that yes, there was this sort of fearlessness and that desire to impress. You'll see some quotes here of this guy here who was clearly doing it to impress the girls and really only bothered about whether he got his hair wet, not worried about the risks, not worried about getting hurt. And as you can see, sort of mentions here of doing it in the summer, wanting to have, you know, good time with their friends, and it just being a really kind of fun, easy, enjoyable thing. And some mention here about kind of going up high. So a very similar kind of feedback that we were getting from the young people to what we'd heard from the professionals as well. But where we started to hear a different conversation was when we kind of talked about whether it was impressive, whether it was something that, you know, it was sort of desirable to see your friend behave in this way. And the girls in particular said that they weren't impressed. They didn't think it was cool. Actually, they thought it was rather stupid. They think that they're hard, but they're not. And so there's this sort of real contrast then. And, you know, what we'd heard is that those young people were egging each other on, but actually there was a sense in this room, at least, that that wasn't the case, and that it wasn't actually something that they wanted to see or they were particularly impressed by. As we continued to talk about friendships, we also found that, rather than egging each other on and encouraging each other to take risks, they describe friends as being people who looked out for you, people who had your back, people who protected you. This one girl in particular described herself as the mum friend, someone who looks out for everybody else and makes sure that they're okay. And in line with that, there was a real sense that friends don't let each other get hurt. And there was some quite graphic language in the way that young people described how they would look after each other. I'd grab them, I'd drag them away, I'd slap them down. There's a real sense of like, I'd get them off the edge, I would pull them back and I would save them. And everybody felt the same way about that they would put a limit on the risks that their friends would take. And we found that actually there was no education really to be done here, that young people knew what the risks were. They talked quite eloquently about the different challenges that they would face if they got into the water. They talked about case studies they'd heard, and some of them had some quite hard-hitting presentations when people had come into school and told them what happens, and particularly one case of a little boy called Dylan, whose mum campaigns now to support other young people by educating them. They had seen that same presentation. What was also really interesting when we found out that young people already know what the risks are is that they also assess the situation. So they talked about seeing how deep it was, checking the signs, looking at safety precautions, doing their research before they went to an area. There's a real sense that young people do take responsibility and do think about what they're about to do. And there's this interesting assessment here of one young guy who said that he wouldn't jump too high or he might go splat, but he had a limit which was about going 3 meters. He kind of thought, well, if it's higher than 3 meters, I won't do it. And that was his risk assessment that he made. We talked about the communications that exist already, and there was a real sense, and that's obviously what a huge amount of this conversation today is about, is that if you tell me no, I'm going to do it anyway. If you tell me stop, it's going to make me want to do it. Someone described it as being like the red button. I'm going to press it if you tell me not to. And so, telling me I'm going to die, telling me that it's really risky is just a total turn off, and I'm either not going to listen or I'm going to do it anyway. And something that was really surprising to us when we talked to them about sort of what the sort of channels and approaches might be to conversations and getting this message across, we thought probably it would be something on social media, but the young people told us very clearly that they'd be very likely to scroll past it, and what they'd prefer is to have someone come into school, possibly to show a video, but then to have a conversation with them and engage in a discussion and an opportunity for the young people to kind of give their voice in this, to make sure that they were able to have a discussion and ask questions and talk with each other, as well as a professional in the room. So that was a real kind of surprise to us as well in terms of the method of delivery. So here are the 3 territories that we took into our second co-design session. So this is having heard all of the insights from the young people. These are the 3 ways that we wanted to kind of experiment with what we'd heard. First was obviously builds on the idea that actually the girls aren't very impressed, and it's sort of maybe to make a mockery a bit of the boys in particular when they're taking those risks, to sort of embarrass them or to stop them in that way. The second one is much more about kind of love and care and support, which we heard really strongly from the young people. And the third one was more neutral, just for friends to be able to share information and say, it's up to you now. Look, I've told you about the risks. I've told you I don't approve of what you're doing. It's up to you. These 3 don't represent the 3 territories. I just wanted to give examples of the ways in which we took ideas into the session. So we had sketches and then they gave us their feedback. And as with the previous session, they were very honest about what they liked and didn't like, and the things that kind of worked for them and didn't. And that allowed us to really, really narrow our focus and come to a conclusion that we would produce the following campaign, which is Have You Got Their Back? And this is building on the foundational insights that they do care for each other. They have an innate sense of what the risks are and when those are too great. There's an opportunity through this platform to empower them to trust their instincts and do that risk assessment. And importantly, it doesn't pretend that young people won't take the risks. There's an opportunity here to self-police with that positive bystander effect of young people looking after one another. And we incorporated the voices of young people. You remember from the slide that I showed earlier that they actually said, a friend is someone who's got your back. And that was why we used that language, because that very much came from Wigan Youth Zone. So here is the essence of the approach. We think that it was really important in the way that we, understood from young people to ask questions, and, rather than giving orders, to respect the fact that young people have a perspective. It empowers them to make the right decision. Keeping it catchy, a lot of what we presented to the young people felt too long, and it didn't feel like it really caught their attention. We really wanted the opportunity for them to risk assess, so giving them a way in which they could look at the situation and decide for themselves what was important and how far they could go. Celebrating their bonds, we really, really wanted to show that connection between young people and the fact that they're looking out for one another, that actually they're not trying to get each other hurt. To keep it brief, as I mentioned, so less is more. We really sort of stripped it back to some simple language, and making sure that it was peer messengers rather than authority figures who were sharing the campaign message. And here's the creative. So as I say, we wanted to kind of keep it as clean as possible, focusing on the friendships, focusing on the fact that young people don't want to see each other get hurt, and they do have each other's back, and they want to call them back from the water if it's too cold. So this is an example of an open water situation. Here's an example of one, a young person jumping into the lock. And the third one was jumping off a bridge. And we experimented with different visuals as well. So we thought about going and taking photographs in a real situation, or taking footage that already existed online. But that was, as you can imagine, there are lots of complications attached to lots of those different approaches. And so we used this graphical approach instead to bring it to life, but without sort of showing footage of real people getting themselves hurt, because that obviously wouldn't be appropriate. So I'm going to just pass over to Claire just to kind of finish up and talk about kind of what next for this campaign. Similarly to what Ben was saying, this is a pilot, this is early stages, and actually we're at a much earlier stage than what you saw from Ridecraft. But yeah, Claire can tell us a bit more just briefly about what's going to happen next.
Thanks, Emily. So we spoke to Claremont, to Tim, Mel and Emily back in September. I think they started working in October. So we're really new to this, although clearly not further down the line, the other presentation that we saw, I hadn't realised that that amount of work had been done in such a short amount of time. Amazing. So where we're at the moment is we're doing quite a lot of testing with a toolkit that Emily, Tim and Mel have created, and it's a toolkit for our our staff and our volunteers. We're very lucky as a charity that we have thousands of tremendous volunteers. We do want to make sure that they are involved in this process as much as the staff are. So we're spending some time working on the toolkit and speaking with people internally, specifically in the Northwest at the moment, because the pilot project was in Wigan, and we chose for it to be in Wigan because there is a higher number of fatalities, but actually in the Northwest area, and the Wigan team had the capacity to help us at this point. So we've got a lot of internal stuff to do. We want to make sure that everyone is happy and understands what we're trying to do, to make sure that the way that they speak to young people recognises that, filters that message through. It can be very easy with my young child. If she were to do something that I saw was dangerous, I'd probably shout at her. So I know a lot of probably say, "Oh, stop doing that." We want to avoid that happening. If people are worried about some teenagers, some young people they see actually engaging in what they would consider to be risky behaviour, we need to make sure that they don't quickly jump in and say, sorry, jump in's the wrong word, quickly approach the situation and try to get them to stop doing it. They need to approach them in a way that's actually going to work with the young people and the teenagers. So we've got quite a bit of work to do. So it's not a quick fix, it's a long-term project, and I'm really excited to actually get started, get using the toolkit. I hope that was the right way to end that.
Thanks,
Is there anything I've forgotten?
Fabulous. Thanks, Claire. And it is such a big shift, isn't it, for the trust into a different way of communicating. So, you need to hold the hands of your colleagues and roll that out in the right way over time and get people used to this different way of communicating. But it's been magic collaborating with you guys on this over the last few months, and your kind of your bravery, I suppose, for really having a new approach to this has been quite inspiring for me and Emily and Mel. So thanks so much for that opportunity, for coming along today. we're going to have to move on. Do get your questions for Emily and Claire into the Q&A. The Q&A section is coming up, but not before we have our final speaker, and that is Porrick Walsh. Hi, Porrick. And Porrick is an experienced behavioural psychologist whose work focusing, much like Claremont's actually, on applying behavioural science to solve real world problems. Porrick is an associate fellow of the Psychological Society of Ireland, and you lecture at University of Limerick and Trinity College Dublin and the National University of Ireland. But I would say surely your highest accolade is your many collaborations with Claremont over the last few years with some of our knottier challenges, not least with the Sussex and Surrey police work around drink driving, which was referenced earlier that you worked with us on a couple of years ago. It's been great to collaborate with you, Porrick. So you're going to share some reflections on what we've just heard from Claire and Emily and Ruth and Ben, and broadening out the conversation a little bit to safety approaches in general. Porrick, over to you.
Thanks very much, Tim, and thanks to the previous speakers, Emily and Ben. They were really fantastic presentations and examples of behaviour change campaigns that focus on really, really important issues. And I might, as Tim mentioned earlier on, I'm Porrick Walsh. I'm here from rainy Dublin. I had to move inside because the Wi-Fi is so poor. So now you can see all of my children's artwork in the background. But we are a behavioural insights consultancy. Most of my work has been in the clinical area of behavioural psychology over the last 20 years. We are Ireland's leading behavioural insights consultancy. We have many different consultants. You can see here a QR code to follow us on LinkedIn, and we're certified members of the Global Association of Behavioural Scientists and the Behaviour Analyst Certification Board. But what we do is we tackle everyday challenges for top private and not-for-profit organisations in Ireland and in the UK. And as Tim has mentioned before, one of our key partners has been Claremont, where we have designed drink driving campaigns focused in on behavioural science and behavioural insights and key psychological changes that have occurred. So what I'm going to talk with you about today has been the journey of behavioural science over the last 60, 70 years and how it has changed. Because what's important about the two presentations that you saw beforehand is that they are essentially behaviour change campaigns. And behaviour change campaigns that are designed to keep people alive. And this work is important. We take our role as psychologists in changeable very, very seriously, as do the guys in Claremont and their partners in those two campaigns. And behaviour change campaigns aren't designed to be sexy. They're not designed to be virtuous. The messaging that's put out in a behaviour change campaign is not done to make us feel good. So if saying stop were to be effective, it's our mandate to say stop in a particular campaign. But what we have found is that over the last 70 years of examining human behaviour and of making it more and more bespoke as we look at different areas and different populations, we see that actually human behaviour is much more complex than that. And I'm going to talk you through the three waves of behavioural science as we see them. The first one is, you can see from both Emily and Ben's presentation that we really need to take time to understand the brief and the target behaviour to change. The second thing that we're going to talk about is that wave 3. We are currently in wave 3 of behavioural science, and I call this values-based messaging, where we try and understand the values of the individual or the social group and tie them towards behaviour change. Wave 1 was focused very much on that say stop. Wave 2 looked at that cognitive approaches, and I'll explain them later on as we go through this. And then the final thing is that demographic information, when we're dealing with groups, doesn't necessarily predict behaviour. So, I don't know if any of you are familiar with The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but they found that the number 42 is the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. And in the distant past, a race of hyper-intelligent, pan-dimensional beings created a supercomputer named Deep Thought to determine the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. And Deep Thought eventually found that the answer to be 42, and this is important, an answer that made no sense because the ultimate question itself was not known. So I would equate this to wave one of behavioral psychology. B.F. Skinner, the psychologist, would have identified through operant conditioning that negative consequences, punishments, threats reduce the likelihood of potential behavior occurring into the future. And this was really nice from a cultural perspective as well, because it fitted with religious and cultural beliefs whereby if you did something wrong, you deserve to be punished. Now in the 40s, 50s, 60s, we had data to support that hypothesis. And it felt like we had now found the ultimate answer to the ultimate question. But this ultimate answer was to a question unknown, because what happened was that the stop or else, the threat, the punishment, the fine, the threat of incarceration, the threat of punishment became the ultimate answer across the board, regardless of the context, regardless of the social situation, regardless of the other variables that were at play. This was the ultimate answer, and this was wave one of behavioral psychology. And what we found then was that that basic behavioralism really defined what wave one was. Then later on, we have wave two, where we start to understand that our behavior is influenced more by cognitive processes, and you will see biases and nudges becoming more prevalent, and that understanding, and it built on wave one. And wave three has built on wave one plus wave two. Wave two incorporated this idea that that human beings, it's somewhat are predictably irrational, and that social contexts and cognitive contexts influence our behavior hugely. What you saw from Ben and from Emily this morning was wave three. And this builds on wave one and wave two, and it's what we call values-based behavior change. We need to understand what matters to you, to the group, to the audience, and then what purpose this set of behaviors means to you. So for those children who were those teenagers and young adults who were jumping into the canals, you could see through the co-design process that there were a lot of social influences, environmental contexts, beliefs, intentions, emotions that were influencing that behavior, and that it served a function. It served a true and meaningful function for these young people. And were stop to be effective, well, then we would have to include that in our campaign. But what was very clear from talking with these young people was that the risk and the danger was outweighed by the connection with their social group and the need to live for that moment and to have ownership over their space. And this was really important in the co-design process. I think one of the theories that has really defined wave three is self-determination theory. And this idea that as human beings, we have three basic needs. We need to feel competent, and we need to gain mastery and control of our own lives and our environment. The second is that we need to feel autonomous and in control of our own lives, our behaviors and our goals. And this is really about choice. And then finally, relatedness, that we need to have a sense of belonging and connection with other people. Now, as I'm talking about this, you can see the arrows which weren't meant to come up. But you can really see how the Ride Calf campaign honed in totally upon competence as a key behavioural lever that needed to be leveraged in that campaign. For the Canal campaign, it was something different. Have you got their back is really leveraged by relatedness and how connected you are with the social group that you have. And then finally, autonomy, the need to have control over your behaviors and your goals and having choice within this. Rather than being told what to do, you're not talking at me, you're talking to me or with me. And that was leveraged in both campaigns really, really well. The final thing I'll say is that where we're dealing with large groups or audiences, And this is something that we could spend a day talking about. Demographics are often gathered. Age, location, marital status, gender, that type of thing. But you'll notice that the co-design process goes much, much deeper than that. And it asks about certain elements. And this is a meme that has popped up on my page a number of different times over the last few months. And I think it's fantastic. Prince Charles is a male born in 1948, raised in the UK, married twice, lives in a castle and is wealthy and famous. So is Ozzy Osbourne. So these personas should not be about demographics, and they should be about the problems and challenges that we face. So in the co-design process, this isn't an arbitrary process that is designed just to tick a box within our assessment criteria. You can see that the co-design process is used to understand things like the group values, motivations, and the social context for people riding their bikes around corners in a particular way, but also where you have young people jumping into a canal, potentially putting themselves at risk. Having an understanding of the behavioural levers that are acting for each of those groups. The answers to that don't just come from demographics, but they come from understanding much more detailed context that aren't necessarily easily gathered on quantitative data forms. That's been very, very brief. I'm happy to answer any questions about this and go into greater detail, but I really appreciate, there's our QR code again, and thank you very much.
And thank you, Porrig. Thanks for that run through. If I can ask all of our other friends to come on camera now, that'd be great. Here they all are. And we've got a couple of questions already in the Q&A, which we'll field those now. I might take the second one first, actually. And so, and Ben and Ruth, I'll come over to you for this one. But we heard in our work with Ridecraft that first kind of epiphany, Ben, about sort of smuggling in the safety, didn't we? But then that kind of sort of sets up a need for quite an onward journey to be able to actually deliver the goods in terms of behavioural change. So can you talk to us a little bit about how we thought about designing that, Ben?
Thanks. Yeah. When we say smuggle in the safety, not to be confused with not doing safety. That's what we're there to do. We just had to not frame it using the language of safety and crashing and catastrophe, because we found that this audience had put off by that. So we had to do safety without talking about safety. And so, yes, the onward journey was important. We particularly found there was an opportunity because these riders were already consuming video about riding. They were going onto YouTube, watching riding videos already. When we dug around and asked them about their lifestyles, we saw that they were, and that created an opportunity for us to piggyback on that and get them to not just watch the video, but also send them off to a destination, which for us were some real life training interventions which were being provided by third parties. The private sector was very, very good at giving bike safety courses. The bike safe community, the fire and rescue community up and down the country are providing courses. So we had an opportunity to use the videos and the hook that we created to send them to those deeper interventions, to send them to those courses. So I suppose my answer comes in two parts, Tim. First of all, we did do safety. We just smuggled it in by talking about the craft. And we did use Onward Journey by sending them off to training-based interventions because we could see that they were into videos. Does that answer the question? I'm not sure.
I think it does. And Ruth, in terms of those sort of onward journeys and other organisations that provide training and resources like Ben referenced, quite a lot of them have been involved in Project Apex, haven't they? I think.
Yes, yeah, we've had many inputs from different agencies. We've worked with Two Wheels London, UK Road. Obviously, all forces that have been involved with us have got their individual bike safe teams. The officers forces that have got officers on the road policing teams. Yeah, it's been very vast and very effective.
Yeah, it's definitely an ecosystem that Rycroft can, help push people towards as hopefully it develops over the next couple of years. Thank you. We've got another question as well around testing, and I might come to you, Emily, on this one. You're our qual and co-production lead here at Claremont, so you're well placed for this. But how do we go about testing visuals and messages? Is it just simply a case of asking people what they prefer? How do we actually go about running those sorts of sessions with our audiences?
Thanks, Tim. You'll remember from that second co-design session that we had a very lively bunch of teenagers in the room who were rather distracted by the pizza that was coming in at the same time. But we were very keen for them to give us that kind of quite visceral reaction. And I think that's similar to something that Ben has said in his comment as well about we're looking for reactions. If they just sort of shrugged their shoulders or looked the other way or didn't have much to say on it at all, that was a problem for us. We wanted to hear stuff that they really liked and really didn't like, and to kind of get a sense of where we could kind of meet them with the things that attracted their attention. So yeah, we got some really good reactions. You might remember that that first visual I showed you of that guy with sort of wet hair and sort of weeds in his hair and looking a bit stupid, and you might have seen the comment underneath. It said, he looks like a dickhead, which was kind of what we were looking for, to get that reaction from people to sort of see whether that made them pay attention. And so that's our first way of doing it. And often when we're doing sessions, we're kind of putting images up on the screen and just, what do you think about that? What's your reaction to that, rather than, do you think this one's better than this one? Or like a leading question that would encourage people to go down a certain route. So we have to pause and we have to say as little as possible actually in those sessions, and let those audience members say it for us really, and give us their initial reactions and views, and then take it from there.
Thanks. And Porrick, can I bring you in here as well? That this idea that people might actually be unreliable predictors of how they're going to behave in future. How do you kind of accommodate that idea as you're going about these sorts of testing?
Reactivity is always a big worry when you're looking at either observation or questions. I remember a colleague saying to me before, if you want to know what somebody wants you to think of them, ask them a question. If you want to know what they're really up to, look at their search history and watch what they will do. And setting behavioral experiments is a really good way to understand that. So even just changing the frame of a question from the conditional tense of what would you do in this situation to asking them, what have you done? So that can really be an effective way where we have limited resources. I can see both Emily and Claire's and Ben and Ruth's projects were done within a very short time frame, and it can be difficult to gather participants and get approval for an experiment that's going to be behavioral in nature. But even just the way that we frame questions from the conditional tense towards the past tense can be a really effective way of understanding what somebody has done, particularly if there's a permanent product. If there's some evidence that they have given for what they have done previously, that can be a nice way to understand what people will do rather than what they want you to think of them.
Yeah, and even just from I suppose just from a sort of basic creative perspective, we also, Ben, it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on this. Do we sometimes see that people react potentially quite badly to a creative or an idea that might be quite effective? Where have we seen that in our work before?
Well, if I just step back, I think something that Emily said, I just want to build on, which is a real risk with any campaign like this, is the meh factor, that they just have no reaction and they just sort of sit there like, whatevs. And being politely ignored is a huge risk, particularly for public sector campaigns. And what I have seen over the years is it tends to happen when you have committee-based decision making, where you have groups of clients who, well-intentioned, but shave away the edges of an idea or an approach in order to avoid controversy. They sort of say, meet me halfway on things. And they do that again and again until you end up with this blobby, fudgy, soupy thing, which lacks edge and definition. It doesn't offend anyone, so it sails through the approval processes, but it also has no edge and pointiness, and has a much diminished saliency with the very people that it's after. If the idea really jars with certain groups, probably on the client side, then there's a high probability that it's right. because it's not being served up for our clients, it's being served up for a particular group. Now, when you're dealing with young people around a canal, or you're dealing with superbike riders, these are very distinct segments who do things which to people outside of those segments seem completely mad, irrational, and weird, such as, I think someone's put something in the Q&A, the chat, they don't care about consequences. You know, like I've been beating the drum with the riders, they don't care, they don't really care or want to talk about crashing. Now, you would have thought, as a non-rider, that talking about stacking it, dying, breaking bones, having a friend die would be a pretty powerful lever. But sadly, or not even, let's take the emotion out of it, the reality is for this high risk group who corner at high speeds on a bike, it doesn't work. It isn't for them. We found other things like gallows humor, dark humor, and using language like, instead of talking about crashing or danger or safety, we talk about squeaky bum corners. It was like a Top Gun humor that we found that went through things. That's the game that we need to play. And I think that being able to hold on to an idea like that and to hold on to those underlying standpoints and truths that Porrick was going through in his session, that's the key to getting a really targeted, pointy piece of work at the end. I've rambled, Tim. Apologies. I still don't know if I answered your question, but
never a ramble, Ben. It's fine. But I mean, I suppose for Claire and Ruth, our work with both of you has tried to sort of push in a new direction, a new way of communicating for your audiences. We touched on this briefly earlier, but it might be nice to come back to how it's going in terms of implementing this new way of communicating on your side. Claire, if I could come to you first, because it's so different. How are you dealing with potentially understandable resistance from people who might be using this kind of messaging?
Well, I've always worked in external communications, but I feel like I work in internal comms right now because I need to spend so much time, and I want to spend so much time making sure that everybody knows where we're coming from and why we need to make the change. Why can't we just do what we've always done? Well, because nothing's changing. And if we want something to change, we've got to try something new. So that's why I'm trying to spend a bit more time speaking with our teams and making sure that they understand the thought processes behind. Emily's been amazing at giving presentations left, right and centre and borrowing her presentation to speak to teams within the trust. Obviously, we are starting small and we're doing work within the Northwest at the moment, but once we've trialled it and piloted it within that region, we will be taking it to other regions as well. So it's an ongoing process, and I'm sure it will be one that will continue as each region sort of embraces the new way of working. So it's a bit of a long project, but it's exciting to be trying something new to actually get a behaviour change that is going to save some lives.
And that same principle applies in our work with you, Ruth, doesn't it? It's we know our focus is on the bank holiday weekends when those dust covers are coming off the bikes, like Ben explained earlier, and you also have an obligation, a duty, obviously, as police forces to enforce on the roads as well. And how have you found, do you think, balancing up this kind of skills-based encouragement approach that we've developed alongside the need to still keep that enforcement message out there as well?
I think it's been really good. One of the biggest challenges has been re-educating the officers on the ground to share a different message. We've gone down the enforcement route for so long, and the data that we constantly review shows that our current working methods weren't working. So hence why we're looking at doing things differently, sending out a different message. Like for example, like shock tactics. There've been many adverts on the TV about, what would happen if you didn't wear your seatbelt. You could potentially hit the driver and cause a nasty accident. We figure that a lot of the general public are becoming numb to those messages now, so we need to change our tactic. we understand that a lot of road users don't believe that they are going to be involved in an incident, and with motorcyclists, their worst fear is dropping their bike or damaging their bike, not the fact that they might not go home that night. So we've had to speak to the roads policing officers to say, look, this is the new message that Claremont have identified, is going to get into the psyche of road users, education rather than enforcement. Like the previous presentation, if you tell somebody not to do something, they're going to go and do it. So we need to make them understand the whys and the hows to avoid something, and just grow from there, really. As if you plant the seed and let it grow, then people will figure out for themselves how to become a better rider, how to make sure they get home safely, and how to look after other people on the road, because it's not just all about them.
Yeah, I might come back to that idea in a second, Ruth. Thank you. I can see Porrick wants to come in here, please.
Yeah, just on Ruth's points there, I recall from our work on the drink driving campaign with Sussex and Surrey, one of the more difficult aspects of designing the campaign was exactly as Ruth had said there. When we were talking with officers who were on the roadside, it was very reinforcing for them to portray a shock message, because you got an instant response from the driver, and for them they felt like this was effective because you would see people feel shocked. And similarly with the advertisements or the messaging that might go out that is shock related, you will see an immediate response from people, which we can perceive as, well, that's certainly going to lead to behavior change. But as I alluded to at the start of our presentation, we're not doing this to have people very knowledgeable necessarily. We're not having it to evoke emotion from people. We're designing communications for behavior change. And certainly emotion and cognition and our thoughts and knowledge influence our behavior. But if it just rests with the first two and doesn't influence the third, we're not doing our job particularly well. So it's just that challenge of it being very reinforcing and rewarding for both an officer or even an agency, where a shock tactic evokes emotion from people in the immediate. But as the driver or the rider goes into the situation where we're looking for desired safety behaviours, we're just not seeing them to the same level that we would hope.
Thanks. And Ben, you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks. I'd like just to add that the officers that we worked with were amazing, and a lot of them were riders themselves, and they knew that we needed to do things differently. And when they saw the work, eventually, the point of view, the emphasis on empowerment and on craft rather than trying to be judgmental or wag fingers at people, they responded incredibly positively. And you will recall, Tim, in fact, at one time, there was one of the roads officers there got pretty emotional about it. And we're just like, oh my God, this is what we've been needing all this time. This is something that is going to work. Because the officers, they are some of the most streetwise, savvy professionals, alongside nurses and so on, that you could ever wish to work with. They can spot bullshit a mile off. And when they see a campaign which is ticking all the boxes, keeping the bosses happy, but isn't going to work, they know it. And when they see a campaign like this, that they know is going to work for the people that they deal with roadside, they get behind it. And I know, Ruth, that you were particularly happy to see that this went down well with motorbike officers specifically. Not there was the roads officers, but the motorbike officers in particular. And that was a litmus test for us, because they know effectiveness when it's in front of them. And for us, that was this pilot phase. That was probably a really important goal for it. Is that it got that those officers were happy and supported it, because we knew that we were on something if they were.
Yeah, and it was really nice to see that sort of loop close, Ben, wasn't it? You brought up a screen earlier from, I think it was Surrey Police, who were using some of that Rycraft material, and you got that really powerful comment from a rider saying this demonstrates that this force is, you know, on the side of the riders, which is exactly what we're trying to create. They're passionate and incredibly skilled riders themselves, you know, bike officers, and you know that's exactly that loop that we want to create. It's sharing that passion, it's sharing the expertise, and that's coming back in terms of favour towards that force, and it's just a much better atmosphere for these kind of campaigns to play out in. So, very positive.
There was an important thing here about what is the role of the campaign, and a lot of officers, the roads officers, steered us to say, look, the role of the campaign is not on the very pointy end of arresting people and so on. We've got that covered. The role of the campaign is earlier on, pre-caution even. They can go up to riders at the roadside before they've done anything wrong and just use the Ridecraft campaign for engagement as a tool to aid those conversations. And I think that's a really important consideration for everybody who's on this webinar, to ask yourself at the beginning, what is the link in the behavioural chain that we're going to focus on? Where are we going to do our work in this kind of customer journey? We can't do the whole journey. We need to focus on the bit where we can make the most difference. And in the case of motorbikes, it was in that pre-caution, pre-arrest, pre-early stage of prevention. And I think that's why it chimed so much with the officers.
Absolutely, thank you. We've got questions coming in thick and fast. I'm going to try and do my best with these, but we're going to go back to quoll design, actually. Emily, if I can bring you in here. We've got a question from Elizabeth Box. Hi, Liz. Does the panel, I'm going to start with you though, Emily, does the panel have any views on making sure that co-design is sort of correctly used in designing interventions? So Liz has seen examples recently where the behavioural theory side of it goes out the window in favour of just bringing about an approach that people think will be effective. So how do we, when we're working at Claremont, make sure that behavioural thinking remains part of that co-design process?
Thank you. Yes, I'm sure my colleagues would say similar, but it's very important for us to work through a process so we wouldn't jump straight to co-design, and just take in a load of creative ideas and fun things that we think might work. It's very much a process that we go through in thinking about the behavioural science first. And often the work that we do will be looking at analysing those behaviours, putting them into a model such as COM-B, so that we have that really strong understanding of capability, opportunity, and motivation, or another model that we might use. And that then drives our kind of early thinking and our hypothesis. So when we're going into that co-design process, we've already got all of that thinking there already. And yes, it is tempting to, when you get creative and start looking in different directions and getting good reactions from people to sort of park that stuff. But I guess what I'm saying is that it's there in the first instance, and so it doesn't get forgotten in the way that we work at Claremont, because it very much informs our activities as we go into co-design, and it's really sort of the co-design is built on those behavioural insights initially.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. We're going to keep rattling through so we get people's questions answered. This is from Heather Clatworthy. Ben, I'm going to come over to you on this one. How do you capture the impact of this work to gauge success?
It isn't easy. We, as I mentioned before, some of the metrics we use are not necessarily right at the outcome, behavioural outcome level. Initially, we wanted to see if we could create something that would be of value to officers on the roadside for those conversations with riders. And so I think isolating the metrics of what you're trying to achieve beyond the obvious of the final behavioural outcome of reducing KSIs is important. So what do we mean by that is starting out with a very, very clear theory of change and seeing where your campaign fits into a wider system, and trying to then isolate the individual indicators that could show that you are likely to have had impact. There is a tendency to overemphasize the randomized controlled trial, which is the ultimate in impact measurement. But for the vast majority of practitioners on this call, the option to do a randomized controlled trial won't be there. That doesn't mean that you don't proceed. You just need to do impact measurements in other ways. And that means building a dashboard of different metrics, which at least will give a reasoned, evidenced indication that you're having impact, and you can take that collectively. Sometimes we have to measure impact with our work on a budget of hundreds of pounds, not the hundreds of tens or hundreds of thousands that would be needed for a randomized controlled trial. And so impact measurement has got to be proportionate and focused for the particular task that you're in. But we could have perhaps we should have a separate webinar just on impact measurement, Tim, so that we can get into the practicalities of this.
I'll get right on planning that one, Ben. Thank you. I've got a question for Porrig, and these sort of linked questions from our friends at Safer Tourism. But Porrig, it comes back to this idea that people just don't think that bad things are gonna happen to them. So the belief that an accident won't happen to me seems to underpin much of our understanding. This is at Safer Tourism, the barriers to behaviour change in terms of risk behaviours and safety. So what's your feelings around how you address that fundamental perhaps misbelief that people don't think that bad stuff's going to happen to them?
It's in some ways an optimism bias. We use it to survive, and similarly we have a negativity bias where we would perceive threats and sometimes amplify those, but that optimism bias helps us to survive and get on. And I would always think about it in terms of loss aversion and saying, okay, look, if things are so good, let's not lose what we already have. So let's think about the things that you have and how you can't lose it. So I think with the Sussex drink driving campaign, we said, think about your job, think about your wife and kids, because it was that we were targeting that middle-aged male age group. And we were thinking, okay, loss aversion here, rather than catastrophizing this into something that is going to shock, let's just get people to think again about this. Because ultimately, a lot of the time as a psychologist clinically, you're trying to help people who might have, irrational fears to work through those and say, well, actually, you don't need to catastrophize everything. At the same time, where there are risky behaviors being taken, I think it's trying to get people to stop, think, consider. And the way to do that is to present it in a loss aversion, that there are things that you have that you may lose if things were to go wrong. And that's how I would approach that one, Tim.
Thanks, Porrig. And we've got time for one more, and I think we're going to finish with Canal. So Claire, I'll come over to you on this one, but we've been asked by Ross McLeod, who we know. So when we're encouraging these youngsters to look after their mates, having their back, are we planning to give them additional content to help understanding what having their back really means, or are we open to sort of leaving that to interpretation? It'd be interesting, Claire, to get your view on that, and maybe you as well, Emily.
Yeah, that is a really good question. And Ross is the person to ask that kind of thing. He's good at questions like that. So we're in early days. We're still testing the toolkit internally before we actually take it externally. And as Emily mentioned in her presentation, one of the surprising things that we heard is that the young people actually would prefer to hear that message in person. We talked about making videos, being on TikTok, but they were like, oh, just scroll past it. It's not the content I'm looking for on TikTok. I'd rather someone said this, listen to this, show them a video within context, and talk to them in person. So I think we are yet to look into how this is going to develop on the ground, but I think we're going to be doing quite a lot of community outreach, and we'll need to make sure that we have the capacity to deal with that, so that it's not just a quick, oh, right, we've done Wigan, we'll see them in 10 years. No, it's something that we develop and grow within the work that we offer as the Trust. Our mission is to make life better by water, and that needs to be apparent in all the work that we do, to make sure that people feel safe coming to the water and that they're comfortable making safe choices by the water. So there's quite a lot that we need to do, and I'm sure I'll be speaking to Ross about that in the future. He's from RLNI with the excellent campaign Float to Live, so please check that out as well if you haven't seen that one. I hope that answers the question.
I think it does, Claire. Thank you very much. Sorry, Emily, we haven't got time to bring you in, I'm afraid, because we need to bring proceedings to a close. So, Claire, thanks for finishing us off there. So I'll just wrap up today. I want to thank all of our speakers, Ruth and Claire and Porrick, Ben and Emily. Thank you all for your contributions and all your preparation. Really, really appreciate it. Thanks to all our colleagues behind the scenes who have been pumping questions onto my second screen over here, and getting this event organised and getting you all invited, and really appreciate all their support. And thank you everyone on this seminar, on this webinar today, for coming along. Do drop us a line with any feedback, anything you'd like to see Claremont cover in future. We're all ears on that. And of course, if you want to talk about any work that you might be planning, we'd be delighted to collaborate with you, so long as you're willing to stop saying stop in your work. I'll leave it there as everyone's smiling back at me. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you at the next one of these soon. Thank you.